All right, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for the 2021 webinar, Advancing Art and Advocacy Abolition Opportunities in Juvenile Detention. I'm Sherilyn Seeley, the Program Manager for Grantmakers in the Arts. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to review the webinar features so that you have an optimal experience with us today. So first and foremost, you can feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't done so already. And you can do that by clicking the chat box and that chat box symbol at the bottom of your screen. And be sure that you're sending a message to all panelists and attendees. Also, we expect that you will have questions for the presenters. So if you have any questions that are specific to the presenters, be sure to click the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and you can send those questions throughout the presentation. At the very end of the webinar, I will be facilitating a Q&A. And finally, if you would like your experience to include live captioning, select the closed caption or CC symbol at the bottom of your screen in the toolbar and select Show Subtitles. All right. So the Art for Justice Fund, a 5-year initiative established by Agnes Gund, is disrupting mass incarceration by funding artists, youth activists, and advocates working together to reform our carceral justice system. Its goal is to create a justice system which makes communities safer, keeps families together, and reduces the size of prisons and treats people with dignity and compassion. The fund is administered by Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors in consultation with leadership of the Ford Foundation. Today, we're glad to have Helena Huang, Director of the Art for Justice Fund, Hernan Cervante Martinez, National Youth Partnership Strategist for Youth First Initiative, Sean Leonardo, American artist and performer, Margaret Morton, Director for the Creativity and Free Expression of the Ford Foundation, Mark Strandquist, Creative Director for Performing Statistics, and Risa Wilson, the Senior Arts Advisor for the Art for Justice Fund. Today, they'll be discussing the program structure, what they've learned, and why it is so crucial for arts funders and justice funders to collaborate to disrupt and illuminate the inequitable laws and practices that drive mass incarceration and juvenile detention and disproportionately impact Ilana communities. And with that, I'll actually kick it right over to Margaret Morton to get us started. If you could unmute, we want to hear what you're saying, and we know you have great things to say.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, GIA people across the country. My name is Margaret. I am an African-American woman, middle-aged, glasses, salt and pepper hair, here on the unceded land of the Lenape people in the Bronx, New York City. I'm joined by my Art for Justice colleagues, both live and in spirit, coming into the room, along with artists, partners, and leaders of youth justice organizations. And I'm just really thankful for the leadership of Eddie Torres and Sherilyn Seeley for giving us this opportunity and this platform to highlight the power of art and criminal justice reform. I will spend just a few minutes. I really appreciate your overview, Sherilyn. You saved me some time. I will spend just a few minutes giving some context about the Art for Justice Fund, and then turn it over to my colleagues for a deeper look at solutions for restorative justice for youth, followed by a discussion of kind of what we've learned and where we're going. So it was 2015, between 2015 and 2017, the trend of discriminatory state sentencing patterns and criminal justice practices that targeted Black and Latinx communities gained greater public attention. People of color faced aggressive fatal abuse by law enforcement that continues today, remarkably, while representing the majority of those sentenced and incarcerated in state prisons. Agnes Gund was moved to challenge this staggering national problem And she bravely stepped in with a groundbreaking gift that's a bit legendary now, of $100 million to create the Art for Justice Fund. Lawyers and storytellers like Brian Stevenson, Michelle Alexander, and Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th really highlighted the history and the link between mass incarceration and slavery and white supremacy, which was very important. It also raised the dialogue into the mainstream, which ripened the entry of the new fund. Contributing factors include obviously excessive sentencing, including harsh drug laws, mandatory sentences. At the time, 56% of those incarcerated were Black and Latinx people. And these unfair bail practices, fines and fees that just kept a revolving door, trapping people within this system. Three core aspects to Art for Justice. It was a 5-year investment. You'll hear more about additional years later, but really to create strategies to reduce mass incarceration while safely reducing the prison population by 22. The partnership with criminal justice advocates and organizations to disrupt. And finally, a narrative strategy of engaging artists and organizations to really use imagination to not only empower justice-involved individuals, but to create kind of different new realities for investing in community. A dream team, the Art for Justice Fund is really a dream team. It's led by Agnes Gund along with Catherine Gund. It's a mighty, mostly women-led governing board and advisors, which is also a wonderful aspect of leadership. And excuse me, just a few things about grant making over the last, I would say, for almost 5 years. We know that artists figure out how to really uncomplicate things. They bring clarity and imagination. In these first years, the fund invested in artists, writers, organizations already working in the landscape to elevate art and stories that shift the narrative. Notably, investments in collaborative grants were really dynamic and had really galvanizing for the fund. Those investments that really partnered artists with activists, with criminal justice organizations, to really focus on problems in particular were continue to be galvanizing for us. Just illustrative artists included people like Maria Gaspar, many of us know in the arts community, who did important work around Cook County's jail and beyond. Paul Rucker, who is Paul Rucker. He works across performing arts, visual arts. He's done a lot of work to connect slavery and incarceration. And Mahogany Brown, who's done a lot of work with the fund, but especially work that she did with the Florida Voting Rights Project to interview community organizers who were working to restore voting rights to formerly incarcerated Floridians. Overall, an important win, but an important example of the power of these partnerships. And then finally, most recently, Hank Willis Thomas and Baz Dreisinger continued their important work, writing on the wall, that many of us have seen, to transmit onto a courthouse the actual crisis, the inhumanity of what prisoners and detainees are dealing with in COVID. And this was kind of another beautiful example of this power. And finally, just calling out the great work of arts organizations, which we found were already deeply working both with justice-involved youth and with justice-involved adults, both in facilities like Arts for Healing and Justice Network, which represents a wonderful group of organizations working with youth in California, across California. I would say that, you know, the injustice that really drives the adult system holds even greater urgency when we consider the fate of justice-involved youth. And with us today are organizations like Youth First, which is a national organization working to dismantle youth incarceration and invest in communities, along with two groundbreaking arts organizations, Recess and Performing Statistics, where artists are really using imagination to empower youth. It's my pleasure to turn to our first partner and colleague, Hernan Carvente Martinez, National Youth Policy Strategist for Youth First.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Awesome.
Yes, we hear you.
Waiting for these slides to come up. We're still not, you know, fully up there with Zoom, y'all. Let's just keep it real. Pandemic. It's a drag, I know. But I'm gonna get started even without the slides, just by introducing myself. As was mentioned, my name is Hernan Carvente Martinez. I use he, they, el pronouns, and I am the National Youth Partnership Strategist for Youth First. Now, what that really means is that I get to work with amazing young people all over the country who are doing work to close youth prisons and reinvest that money into community alternatives. That work, as you know, previously, I don't know what's happening there.
Steve, you can go to the next slide with Hernan's name on it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and then you can go to the next one.
Great.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, as I was saying, the work that I do around closing youth prisons is not work that I'm doing myself as an individual or Youth First Initiative is doing alone. A lot of the work that we are doing is very much trying to center the experiences of those who've been most impacted by this issue, which is young people themselves, as well as community members and other organizers who are local to this work. The campaign itself, the initiative as a whole, would not be possible without the work of other organizers doing this work right now. When you think about, you know, the wealth of organizers and advocates out there, you can imagine that there are so many partnerships and collaborations happening in each of the states currently. The campaigns themselves, which are represented by some of the logos that you see on this slide, are each comprised of other coalitions of groups that are also a part of this movement to end youth prisons in those states. And so for me, the work at Youth First is very important when it comes to also empowering young people and making sure that they are at the forefront of this issue. When I started at Youth First around 3 years ago, that was not an explicit focus of the initiative in the beginning. And it became very apparent that it was very important for us to actively empower young people and to have them be the leaders in these conversations and really making sure that their leadership was supported across the board. The network itself is comprised of 18 to 25-year-olds. Each state is able to nominate up to 4 young people. We try to really give them advocacy skills, communication skills, leadership skills, but more importantly, we try to really help them connect and build relationships to other leaders, and more importantly, to their adult partners locally. So I came into this work 9 years ago, fresh out of prison, and a lot of my work was at some point trying to educate adults on how to actively engage young people. and really reminding them to check their adulthood, to check themselves as people. Now being a 28-year-old going 29 next month, I can understand how frustrating it actually is to work in collaboration with young people and be the adult or be seen as the adult, because I'm no longer seen as the peer, but I'm actively seen as another authority figure in their lives. And so it's really important from the work at Youth First that we're actively empowering young people, that we're giving them the opportunity to really elevate their voices, and that I, as an adult ally, am constantly reminding myself, as well as my peers doing this work, of the constant need to take a step back, to sometimes just the need to shut up sometimes and actively listen to young people, regardless of what position, whether you're an ED of something or whether you're in philanthropy doing this work. We need to listen to those who are closest to the problem, because they are also closest to the solution. And so for me, the importance of doing this work comes from a natural need to want to make sure that young people are supported at every step of the process. And so for the leadership work that we do, I try to make sure that I'm engaging young people on a one-on-one basis. I'm actively trying to also support them, not just in the professional context, because these are young people, these are real people. And even the advocates and organizers who are part of these campaigns, they have lives, they all have families, and they have struggles that they go through on a daily basis. And so it's no longer just about supporting the leadership in a professional context, but also meeting the basic needs of young people. We pay young people, for the work that they do. Any consulting that they do on the side, they will get paid for. I will advocate like crazy to make sure that they get paid for as well, and making sure that this work really centers them, because the work to close youth prisons really requires us to think about what community solutions are out there. And what works for New York, where I'm currently sitting at right now, may not work for Kansas, may not work for New Mexico. And so it's really important for us at Youth First that a lot of the work that we've done and the strategy and organizing that we've built into this campaign and the initiative as a whole is very much revolving around what the state campaigns are doing locally. And so what those needs are for that particular state are very specific to those communities. And without engaging the community and those young people locally, we won't truly know where the answers lie. And so we do a lot of this. We try to support young people to be the ones leading the conversations through visiting sessions, which is one thing that we actively have supported our state campaigns in, really having beautiful conversations with community around what solutions are necessary for those communities. I will end with this particular example. In PA, I remember one time going to PA and ultimately having a conversation with young people in the visioning session, where one young person actively said, I'd built paintball courts in every community across Philadelphia. And my immediate response at that point, when I was like 27 years old, that was last year or a year before that, now actually a year before that, before COVID. So I was 26 years old, and I'm here thinking, okay, he just said paintball courts. I'm over here then saying, what about workforce development? What about jobs, security that involves more financial and your well-being? And his response was, well, we've got paintball courts in every community across Philly. Everybody would shoot each other with paintballs and not bullets, and nobody would die. And so that example to me is a constant reminder of the fact that we need to listen to young people, because I'm over here worried about this young person having a job. Meanwhile, that young person was worried about walking down the street and not getting shot. And so a lot of this work, again, highlights that the importance of listening to young people. And I'm sure that Sean and Mark will both talk about how important it is to really elevate that voice through the arts, and how powerful the arts has also been in supporting the collective work of not just our campaign partners through Youth First, but all the other amazing partners doing this work. And so with that, I'm just gonna pass it off to the next presenter. But if you have questions, I'm happy to, again, answer them at the end of this as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, y'all. My name is Sean. I'm the artist and co-director here at Recess, where I'm currently dialing in from in Brooklyn, New York. And props to Hernan, thank you for the pass off in regards to centering young people's voices and allowing them to take the lead and drive the work. And that's is precisely where I will start from and spend my time really speaking to the core curriculum at the heart of our Assembly Diversion Program. Now, in the event that there are people in our invisible audience that don't know the particulars of diversion, I will tell you that youth aged 18 to 25 who have been arrested in downtown criminal court here in Brooklyn for both misdemeanor and, as of late, felony charges, or diverted to a program, a 4-week cycle program, up to 10-week cycle program, that is really invested in a process of visual storytelling. After completion of a court-mandated cycle, our young people have their cases closed and their records sealed so that they may avoid an adult record that would otherwise persecute for the remainder of their lives. Now, whenever I speak to this work, I'm clear as a starting point to say that we invest in our young people well beyond the closure of one case, in full acknowledgement that when they enter through our recess doors and maintain a relationship with us, that they also have an ongoing existence with law enforcement, and that the closure of one case is really never enough in terms of their circumstances and ongoing relationship, in quotes, with the court system, with incarceration. And so our investment instead is to see how it is that a young people can really speak to their own circumstances and tell their story on their own terms. And so our curriculum of visual storytelling actually removes language, spoken language altogether, to see how experiences are channeled through the body and articulated through silent frozen gesture. Our argument being that there are certain stories, certain narratives, particularly those clouded with the trauma of arrest or incarceration, that we don't have the language for. And instead, there's a truth to be conveyed as those experiences flow through the body and are told through a very different capacity, and therefore seen through a very different set of eyes. And so our objective is to have our young people take a hold, grasp their story in a very different way, understanding that they are not defined by that experience of arrest and or incarceration, and that they can move from that place, seeing possibility for themselves, oftentimes for the first time, and that the arts is the very thing that reinstills the imagination, the possibility of seeing oneself outside of a current predicament. And so for our young people, when we're involved in this storytelling work, we utilize two core methods. One in which, again, allows a person to tell their story, but then offer that story to another individual to embody. What that does is allow that storyteller to externalize that event and see that moment, maybe for the first time through an objective lens. It also then allows us collectively, everyone in the room, their peers, to analyze and gain meaning around that story in a more fuller sense, and really look at all of the powers, whether systemic, environmental, or otherwise, that may have led to that moment. And again, it enables a young person to get a fuller understanding of that event and grab a hold of it on very different terms. Oops. As our work expands outside of the recess walls, one thing that I'm always thinking about, and the practitioners and young people that move with me in extending this work, the one thing that we're always questioning is, how do we connect out to other stakeholders, other people that are the closest impacted individuals around something like incarceration? And I should back up and say that Recess has always, from the outset of this practice, taken a much more radical stance and seeing its relationship to our young people outside of just a court mandate. And so any young person can self-select to stay on as a peer leader, a mentor, an artist apprentice, and be paid for their continued work with us. And so as this methodology, as this practice moves outside into other communities, our young people drive what that looks like as it connects out. And I wanted to share this next work, a video project that was conducted in collaboration with Performing Statistics, to share how this particular methodology might be useful in connecting different parties and bringing them all to the same table. Because I want to acknowledge in this conversation that while we are pointing to change and reform in legislation, legislation does not change heart and minds. Culture does. And so the question for me is always, how do we connect with other individuals that would either believe they have no proximity to that looming thing called mass incarceration, or are very closely impacted by these systems of oppression and yet would prefer to remove themselves? And so if our investment is the restoration of a young person's sense of self, a regaining of their humanity, how does that work reverberate out? So this particular project situated itself between 4 different communities: corrections officers, court-involved youth, legal advocates in both prosecution and defense, and formerly incarcerated individuals, to see what common ground might be found, again, when channeling their experiences, their narratives through body language. And the one thing that becomes very clear is that these systems predicate themselves on removing everyone's sense of humanity. So whether you're a young person being churned through the courts, or a legal advocate with a stack of papers that name your quote unquote clients, that name human beings as numbers, or you're a formerly incarcerated person navigating the thick systems of reentry, or you're a corrections officer that is asked to remove themselves in order to contain and control, the very first thing to be removed, to be extracted, to be diminished, is every single one of those people's sense of humanity. It's the only way that these systems can run on a day-to-day basis. And so by bringing them together, we see where these humanity can actually rise to the surface, reconnect people. And in this case, have all these individuals closely impacted by the Rikers all speak to the suffering, specifically of young people, as they've been caged away from their families, disconnected from any possibility of speaking to loved ones, also under the risks and dangers of COVID. And so I will pass it off now to Mark to continue to think about and talk to how this work reverberates out, all by being led and driven by young people.
Thank you, Sean. I think that was amazing. I think we're starting with a video, so let that play first, and then I'll dig in.
Art is gonna always be there. It can affect the future.
Everybody's mind isn't going to be changed, but I think it can change some people's mind because people will see the hard work and dedication that we have put into this project.
Code VA, who are the high school kids who are making all the cool audio that's going to be actually put into the wall. They'll have a couple weeks to design that. When people walk up to this mural and they start to hear you speak from your portraits, it's going to be mind-blowing.
Some kids that are helping us basically putting little computers into the wall, so when people, walk past the mural back and forth, they can hear our story.
Our youth have a vision for healthy communities and a brighter future. I am really excited for you to hear them share in their own words a little bit about what making this mural meant to them.
One day the world will be a future that we want, not this reality where youth are getting incarcerated for no reason, just for the color of their skin.
I feel like people will learn by engaging in this mural that it's a lot of other options.
To become different and become a person instead of treating them like animals.
I feel like one day this mural will be something that tourists come to look at.
I could be a hero to some kids, and it could be like us.
We have the ability to make our reality and to make the world that we live in.
You don't have to be a specific age, you don't have to be a specific color. I think anybody is capable of putting a hand in with changing the world.
Thank you, Steve, for playing that. Can folks hear me okay? So I love this panel for so many reasons. A, because there's so many superheroes on it, but because as you saw in that video, I feel like what makes our work, I think, important, useful, and I think unique is that we're not talking about, like what you saw in that video was all the things that Hernan spoke to, of like centering youth voices, of using art to imagine a world where radically different worlds are possible. But it wasn't just artists working with young folks. It was, we had trauma-informed specialists. We had legal advocates that are a Youth First state-supported campaign, Rise for Youth. We had amazing currently and formerly incarcerated young folks connecting with each other. Really what I'm saying is that like these projects are powerful because of who's in the room, not just what we're doing. And I think all three of these groups have collaborated together in some really beautiful ways. And thanks Art for Justice for making that possible. I'm gonna talk a little bit about Performing Statistics, which began seven years ago in Richmond, Virginia, which is the former capital of the Confederacy. And we began the project as sort of an investigation of the question of how would criminal justice reform change if it was led by currently incarcerated young folks, and how could art be used to amplify those young folks' amazing dreams, demands, stories. And basically the project has, over those 7 years, we've done workshops within youth facilities, we've done paid workshops with young folks coming home, all kinds of different projects around the country. And it's all about imagining a world without youth prisons and using art to heal internally and to sort of create powerful messaging with campaigns, with organizers that can reach tens of thousands of people. We've worked with the young folks to do everything from interactive augmented reality murals to virtual reality films to tons of amazing music, silk screen projects. We're agnostic of art medium. What we want is young folks to fall in love with the power of their voice. The system has tried to dehumanize young folks in a million different ways. And I think that art is like a rare and beautiful space for folks to really see their power. We've had so many like beautiful moments and also so many heartbreaking moments where like a young person turns to one of us and says like, you know, I didn't think I'd be alive past 21. How could I even think about a future world? And I think like that is an indictment on all of us. And like imagination should not be a privilege. It should be one of our tools for getting to the future that we deserve. So for us, like we really focus on who's in the room and ensure that the workshops are co-designed, co-led by both like former youth participants in the project. So we create pipelines for youth leadership, ensuring that everybody is trained and really sort of there to support the young folks in any way they can. And then we connect the young folks throughout our workshops with amazing advocates like Youth First campaigns around the country, so that we're not just making art in a vacuum, but ensuring that what we're creating is connecting to system stakeholders, whether that be legislators, city council members, or as you see in this image, the police chief of Richmond. We've worked with hundreds of police officers who have gone through our exhibit and use it as sort of like a radical classroom to engage social workers, politicians, all sorts of folks, to really sort of understand how this system is impacting young folks, what they need instead, and what they're imagining should be put in place as an alternative. So really, like, we think a lot about art as a stage in 3 acts. The first being this process of co-creating, where we're building something together, like you saw in the mural, that is building confidence, building power, building pathways to youth leadership. And then there's this sort of secondary phase where we're sharing it with the world, and we're connecting these voices, these dreams, these demands with a much larger audience, like the mural you saw. What wasn't in the video was that this was right across, literally from the police station in Richmond. So every day they wake up and go to work, they see this beautiful articulation right outside their windows. And that's been a big thing for us, is like, how are we thinking about location? We're about to drop a 200-foot tall banner on the side of Richmond City Hall that when you hold your phone up to, this is Tadrima, who's a 14-year-old local activist. When you hold up your phone to Tadrima, it'll trigger these augmented reality animations that literally play her vision of a world without youth prisons in the clouds above City Hall. So thinking about, like, how can art be this really magical way to bring so many people into an abolitionist conversation that is also, like both Hernan and Sean have pointed out, like, continually lifting up youth leadership, continually showing like how powerful and why this is so important that we listen to young folks first and foremost. We are about to launch in collaboration with Youth First and Columbia Justice Lab, a interactive web experience called No Kids in Prison. That launches in 3 weeks. It's been like a year in the making, but really I think wanted to just sort of like showcase all the different ways in which art making can happen. But if we're not supporting with robust funding, like these kinds of projects that need more than just, you know, paying an artist to do a mural that's like kind of almost using community to do the piece, we need to really invest in local folks, especially mentors with lived experience, to really help co-lead, co-run, co-facilitate these projects. So excited to talk more and just honored to be on this call.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really, really inspiring. I think you can tell with Mark and Sean what it means to have artists thinking about this work, the compassion and the imagination that they bring to it, centering, you know, the voices of youth, and imagination shouldn't be a privilege. Just you remind us why you're doing and why it's so important. I'd love to start with Hernan, just with one quick question. If if we can, Sherilyn, do we have time for maybe one question now or of the panel before we move on?
Sure, if you want to do that, no problem.
Oh, okay, great. Hernan, we really appreciated your urgency around the need to listen and center the voices of young people and kind of elevate their voice. What do you think, what do you need most in the job that you do? We know that this is really hard work. What do you need as kind of a youth advocate in this space?
Yeah, I think personally, for my time being out till now, and even doing this work now for the last 3 years with Youth First, it's become very clear to me that advocacy and organizing work is not complete when we're not taking care of the people doing it. And so really investing not just in the leadership of young people, but also their mental health, also making sure that their bills are getting paid, and making sure that we're actively checking in on them. During the course of this work, I have, lost organizer and advocate friends to suicide. I've lost them to incarceration, and I've lost many of them just to the pressures of having to sustain themselves and prioritizing work that might otherwise pull them away from organizing and advocacy work, because oftentimes that was being done for free and or on the side, and it wasn't the main source of support that they had. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that doing this work comes with its array of challenges on a mental health level, but that it also does impact people in very different ways. At the end of 2018, I was already at Youth First. I was struggling on so many levels. On a personal level, I was right back with my drug addiction. I was actively suicidal and I attempted suicide and survived. And so I'm being very vulnerable and raw about that, because that's why I'm saying it's so important to take care of our people, to ask them how they are doing, but particularly young people who have literally maybe just come into contact with the system very recently in their life, and they're just got out, and we're already asking them to share that trauma, be a part of this work, and uplifting them, and oftentimes not remembering that they come with all of this other baggage, which comes from the very system that we're trying to dismantle and essentially reimagine and replace with something that is more community grounded and oriented. But based on just that experience alone of being an organizer and feeling like I can't tell people that I'm fucking up, that I'm messing up, that I'm back in drug addiction, or that I need help, is a culture that we have, and it's a culture that we need to continue to push against by actively funding that kind of work, and also just supporting leaders who are doing that. And I'm lucky to still be here to be able to say that out loud. But again, it's really important to say that for other people who are not here, and or some of the young people that unfortunately I got to meet and work for with a little bit of time through some of these campaigns, but who unfortunately are now currently incarcerated. And luckily they have campaigns to write to them and support them. But the ideal would be to not lose another young person when we already have them with us and are already a part of these campaigns. So I would uplift those things as a need for myself and everyone else who's doing this work as well.
I really thank you for that, and I want to just note that we're farther behind than we expected to be. So Sean and Mark, we're going to hold your questions for now, and hopefully we'll have a time to really ask questions of everyone. But want to really focus on my colleagues, Risa Wilson and Helena Huang. Helena really has directed Art for Justice since its inception. Risa is the senior advisor for the arts, and before she was with Art for Justice, she did really important work at the Rauschenberg Foundation that was very instructive to Art for Justice when it started. So a shout out to them. We had thought we would just share some of our learnings, like the most kind of significant things that we've learned in this last 4+ years, and start there, and start with you, Helena.
Great. Well, thank you, Margaret. And I want to just express my gratitude to Hernan. And I know that many of us probably on this call are feeling it, and just your level of candor and willingness to be vulnerable in that way, to share what we all know. As adults, we have a responsibility to do better, and particularly as adults working in philanthropy, we have a responsibility to do better. And so just want to acknowledge that I always learn so much from Hernan and his colleagues at Youth First, as I do from Sean and Mark. And I'm almost, every time I have the chance to listen and learn from them, there's just like more layers and more wisdom that they have to share. And it's actually a little bit of what I had hoped to kind of say, and I'm going to scrap some of what I was thinking I would say, but I think I really want to kind of speak to this moment that we're in, and the opportunities and responsibilities for philanthropy to support some of the incredible transformative work that is at play right now. And I think a lot of it is about more holistic responses, and that means supporting the care of people doing the work. So really, really just appreciate that point. And I think some of what Risa and I kind of wanted to share with all of you as it relates to Art for Justice, which was a bit of an experiment, right? We have been iterating and we have been learning, and we had a couple of really key powerful ingredients. We have incredible donors who are above and beyond, want to be part of the solution, and are willing to kind of put themselves out there in a way. If you've ever worked with Agnes Gunn or Catherine, right? They are like 110%, and they inspire other donors to do the same. And with that, we were able to kind of create space for artists and activists in a way that felt kind of new. And I know a lot of this has been happening in different places, but to be able to do it in a way that we can kind of track these lessons and these learnings has been really powerful. And I think that, it's going to be incumbent on us to kind of continue to tell the story and respond to some of the interests that we're seeing in the philanthropic world at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level. But what I really want to say is that coming from my perspective as a kind of longtime criminal justice philanthropic, funder and practitioner, 2017, when we launched A4J, was already this really interesting time. Agnes has a great sense of timing, and here we were with this opportunity, more and more kind of bipartisan support, the numbers of people, the impact of this scourge, which is mass incarceration, was beginning to be felt culturally and in many ways. And so powerful people started to understand, started to feel it. So there was more bipartisan support, which made it interesting. Critical to that timing was the number of formerly incarcerated leaders who had been building infrastructure and really emerging in powerful roles, and helping to kind of challenge people without lived experience around short-term solutions versus kind of more expansive opportunities to transform the system. So all of that was kind of in play. And we started seeing more and more criminal justice philanthropists. We started seeing the venture capitalists who kind of came in, the Facebooks, the Googles, who kind of came in because they felt like there was a moment to make some change. And they kind of challenged the more traditional foundations that had been around doing this for some time, the Fords, the Open Society Foundations, and the host of other foundations. And that kind of has created its own culture change, frankly, with philanthropy demanding that we work better together. We're so good often at telling grantee partners, well, you need to align your efforts, you need to coordinate, and we weren't necessarily doing that ourselves. So happy to say, 4 years later, there is a group of very organized criminal justice funders who are really sharing and complementing each other in strategy. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. So all of those things has created this kind of momentum. And then you get the pandemic. 2020, you get the pandemic. And then we get the high profile lynching of a man right in front of all of us, George Floyd's murder, and boom, right? We all lived through this. We all saw the response. We saw people of conscience across the country, across the world stand up for justice. And all of that has created some really incredible opportunities to do better. And I think that it is now incumbent upon us to go beyond kind of the piecemeal public policy that has in the past kind of both satisfied and the most that many thought that was possible at the time. And I think today there is a feeling that this is the moment for wholesale reform. This is the time. And I would say, as somebody again who comes more from the criminal justice side, to be joined in partnership by artists and visionaries who think differently and who are creative in expansive ways. That has been the kind of alchemy that we have seen with artists and activists working together. And just some of the examples that Margaret shared and all of our panelists shared, the opportunity to be able to ground this practice and together create some of these new ideas about how we can move forward. What Art for Justice increasingly likes to say is new visions for shared safety. And Margaret and Risa will say a lot more about what that means, because we've really been kind of going through it, taking stock of where we are. We know that this is an opportunity that's politically not going to last forever. So how do we make the most of it right now? And that for us really means supporting these unique collaborations between artists and activists with our donors to take full advantage, to create and imagine, as the young people are already kind of shouting from the sides of buildings, this is what the possibilities look like. So how do we seize those opportunities? How do we do that together? I'm going to pass to my colleague, Risa Wilson, and she can share a little bit about what we're thinking of doing next.
Thank you, Helena. So I think what I also want to just underline is, as someone who came into the life of a 5-year project, right? So that's already very ambitious to tackle this incredibly, seemingly intractable issue in a very short span. And what A4J has done is not exempt itself from the kind of continual learning and evolution that a permanent institution might do. And so very quickly, as Margaret sort of highlighted earlier in the presentation, the evolution of our work has moved from a kind of storytelling frame, a kind of bearing witness frame and narrative change frame, as well as what we think of traditionally as structural change, as policy change, to also include this sort of new vision for shared safety. And so when we talk about imagining a world without prisons and jails and detention centers, when we talk about the need to center youth voices and those most impacted to facilitate that dream, right? In practical terms, we're not just talking about abolishing the current system, we're talking about creating alternatives. And that's the terrain of artists, right? That kind of nimble imagination, creative process, capacity to braid seemingly disparate ideas together, that is the terrain of artists. And so and I'll talk a little bit more about how we're thinking about identifying some kind of futurist work, but I really want to underline that point because, 64 folks showed up to this conversation. And I also know that as arts funders, sometimes it is hard for us to locate ourselves in this work. It might seem like the realm of justice or the realm of straight up social change is something that we have a tangential relationship to instead of a central relationship. But in fact, if we are going to imagine wholesale alternatives to our current system, that is a level of creative capacity that requires not just folks who are in it, right? Not just folks who are in the kind of mechanics, the policy work, the kind of technical fixes that need to happen, that legitimately need to happen and urgently, but also folks that can see beyond it, right? That have the capacity to facilitate some of those local community conversations, understanding that this is very much a community-led process, understanding that there's a range of actors that we need to bring to the table, understanding that we need to actually just be fluent in visioning. And so where our work is going in our next 2 years as we begin to prepare for closing the fund, knowing that the work continues, is making sure that we are resourcing those futurist thinkers, right? That we're, whether they're young folks, whether they're adults, all across this country, understanding that these solutions are not just at an aggregate federal level, but are very much hyper-local. We want to make sure that we're identifying folks who are working in those hyper-local ways to, with their communities, imagine what does shared accountability look like in our neighborhood, right? What would it mean to have de-escalation strategies that don't require the kind of policing models that we've had before? What does it mean to have a truly transformative justice lens where we've designed what it will take to prevent harm and then to address harm when it has happened, right? And that is something that, again, as Hernan lifted up, what works in New York doesn't work in Kansas necessarily, right? And so let us be humble enough to know with certainty there's a lot we don't know, right? And that there's people on the ground who do. So our work in resourcing these new visions for shared safety is really starting from that frame, that there's incredibly creative people on the ground right now doing this work at the block by block level that need to have some resources to be able to do this work well. And again, as Hernan named, get real about what the stakes of that are, and the kind of flexible and substantial resources that are required to do it. Just because it's at the grassroots level doesn't mean that it can get done on a string. So I'll say this one last thing, and then I'll move on. That's where we're going. And again, understanding that we've got a range of folks, right, in this conversation, folks from public art agencies, folks from national institutions, folks who are doing this work. I just want to underline that there's so many points of entry, and that this is one of the things that we've learned at A4J is that our own strategy has to be comprehensive, right? So some people may have heard me talk about the spectrum of change work. And that doesn't matter whether we're talking about justice specifically, or we're talking about climate change, or we're talking about fill in the blank. But if you are working at the intersection of art and social change, you've got projects that are around building awareness. You've got projects that kind of move along in that spectrum of change work and start to mobilize people to deeper engagement with that issue, or mobilize people to take action. And then you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum where you've got folks who are actually imagining a world where that issue doesn't exist anymore. All of that work is required, right? And so if we only locate ourselves in storytelling, then we miss the opportunity to, as Mark named, move from just building power and voice to actually mobilizing the dreams of those young people, right? If we only mobilize folks to deal with the current system, we're still stuck in the current system. And so we've got to also account for, that last leg of the work, right? And not that it's linear and consecutive, it can all be parallel and circular and all the things, but to just name that we have a role to play as arts funders to facilitate this work at the full spectrum of that change. Now I'm shutting up. You're on mute, Margaret.
We can't hear you, Margaret. You're still muted.
There we go.
All right, there we go.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to lose the momentum, Risa, but you know, your last point was really part of the evolution of our learning, you know, really moving from investing in narrative to really engaging artists who better to engage to really help us replace these systems that are broken. So I appreciate that. There's one last character I want to name because it was such a part of the evolution of Art for Justice, and that was the creation of a community of practice that really happened, that, you know, that includes both artists and criminal justice activists and organizations. And that community was born out of a convening, I think, in the fall of 2018. But that coming together to me was so powerful to see, especially the criminal justice colleagues, be moved by the artists that we on the art side knew had been there, always doing this work, always at the front of justice movements. That was really powerful. And that grew into these collaborative grants, these, you know, artist and activist grants, however we call them. Both Sean and Performing Statistics and, you know, have done a lot of great work with organizations and activists, and that will be a continuing legacy of the fund. And I just want to name that, especially for funders out there who are thinking about this kind of work. This work just invites wonderful, surprising partnerships. So I will leave it there. And thank you everyone. And I think we're going to look to our audience for questions.
Yes, thank you. And again, I echo all of the thanks. Thank you to all of our presenters who shared today. And if you have any questions for the presenters, please do drop them into the Q&A section of your screen. So at the bottom, you see Q&A, type it right in and be specific about who your question is for. So we do have 2 questions, and I expect we'll have a few more. Before we get to them, I still want to create a little bit more space for you, Margaret, to ask Sean and Mark that question that you started off with previously. I know they didn't have a minute to respond to it. So while people are sending their questions, please, I would love if you could circle back to that.
Great. Thank you so much. You know, starting with you, Sean, you know, you do such interesting work as an individual artist, and obviously you've created this framework through Recess for really working with individual youth. Can you just talk about like the benefits of kind of working to support folks who are incarcerated versus impacted, and just your experience there, your own learning as an artist in kind of developing those frameworks? And
no, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. And I'll pick up where Risa left off. And I think it's important to name the stakes here. You know, I want to be very sincere that the arts within prison might be the very thing that a person depends on for their survival. It might be the very thing, any exposure to the arts might be the very thing that reminds that individual of their humanity and that they're more than a prisoner. And so for every dollar, and I want to name that because that is very real. And so how do we as practitioners, as artists, grapple with that reality in terms of our output, and as organizations, as philanthropists, grapple with that reality while coming to terms with the risks of, in the case of diversion, that we could very well fall into net widening, making it easier for folks to capture young people because there are programs that will divert cases. And in terms of implementing programming within prisons, how do you do so without running the risk that you're disguising the pain of that containment, of how those systems play out and diminish, again, the humanity of the folks on the inside. And so I will speak to us. I will speak to our philosophy. As we've evolved toward an abolitionist horizon, what has been important to us is to not rely on a system intervention strategy, is to put just as much of our efforts in this space of diversion as it is to working with our young people to refer other young people into our programming without the involvement of the court. What it also has resulted in is a collective effort in understanding the value of our work and having that impact even the structuring and ethos of the organization as much as the programmatic efforts. What it also has pointed to, again, and I'm going back to Hernan and going back to what Mark has offered, is that if we want to develop alternatives to policing, alternatives to system involvement, that our young people are going to drive that work. So we've developed an entire series of community safety workshops that are developed and led by our young peer leaders. And that is where the work in terms of imagining possibilities, imagining community-rooted work that will steer folks away from systems. That is where that work will happen. And as you said, Risa, that all of it is necessary. And so for every dollar you pour into system intervention, you have to pour another dollar or more into liberation. For every dollar you pour into implementing programs within, you have to pour into the alternatives.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Wow. Sherilyn, I think you have questions coming in.
Yes, I do. So the first question, thank you so much. The first question will actually go to you, Mark, so that you can respond to Margaret's original question and then go right into some of the Q&A questions. So the question that the audience member asks is, aside from art making as an outcome, how do you measure impact in terms of what students are learning and how they're transforming?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we always think about impact in concentric circles. I mean, and I sort of want to touch on what Sean was just speaking to as well. Like, I mean, everything we do is through a futurist lens for a lot of reasons. A, because we don't want to ask young folks to like regurgitate the worst days of their lives, to re-traumatize themselves. We want our storytelling experiences to be a way for the young folks to see the power, to fall in love with the power of their own voice, to feel connected to each other, to see how their story is not isolated, like the system tries to isolate them, like the system tries to isolate all of us. And so, but how can we ask young folks to imagine a world beyond this current reality when they're in survival mode, right? And I think that for us, that's part of why, and this goes to the impact and success question, we have shifted in a similar way to Sean was just speaking to, like, we have paid reentry programs that are connecting young folks with all kinds of things that have nothing to do with art making, so that they have the support, they have the foundation they need, so that when we're making projects, when we're doing, you know, vision sessions or murals or whatever it is, you know, they can pour themselves into that, and they can pour their like heart and their brain and their imagination into that. Because it's very difficult to dream of a world that you know, decades beyond the one that you think you'll live in. And I think that's a big question for funders too, is like, you know, when we're talking about young folks who have been systematically targeted, disinvested in, policed, incarcerated, that's like an entire lifetime of, you know, negative, you know, violence. And so what is the reverse of that? Like Sean was just talking about, like, And that's not just arts programming, that's really robust mentorship programs, job trainings, mental health support, and amazing art projects. So when we think about impact and success, you know, if a young person feels proud of what they've done, that's a success. If we connected the work like we have with like tens of thousands of people, that's a success. Helped Youth First campaigns close youth prison, like youth Rise for Youth in Virginia, that's a success. But it's all, one is not more important than the other, and the process needs to sort of be married with the intention of the end result.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. And don't mute too soon, because our next question is for Risa, but I do encourage everyone to, God bless you, Hernan. I do encourage everyone to contribute where you see fit, because this one I think.
And Sean, to that point, so before you move on to the next question, can I just build on something that Mark just offered and the nature of the question?
Yeah.
I think as arts as funders, right, that we've also have to be pretty generous, right, in sort of removing traditional notions of impact, right? Yes, this is youth development. Yes, there are specific, growth that you are facilitating in these specific human beings. And it's movement work. And as part of a larger movement, the very existence of these programs is shifting our cultural frame. And that has direct relevance. We talk about movement work often in systems change, and we think about those systems as laws and policies. But as someone said, and forgive me, I can't remember who it is, I think it was you, Sean, just, hearts and minds matter, right? So laws are codified behavior. Behavior is born from our beliefs and values. So if as a society, we have a set of beliefs that, if you were poor, if you were brown, if you were Black, you belong behind bars, and we're gonna keep having policies that make that so, right? But if we actually have programs that disrupt those beliefs and invite a level of creativity to this entire issue, then we're shifting the entire movement, right? So even if there wasn't transformative results with each of the individual young people that you're working with, your work incrementally within this movement is so important. So I want to lift that up just to invite a kind of broader spectrum of how we're defining success here.
Yep, that's great. Thank you for that. And this is actually a great segue to our next question, because I felt sort of the spirit of like, there are systems, but people make up systems, right? And that's something that we talk about a lot. And so the question that's directed to you, but anyone else, feel free to chime in. What is the role of government agencies who have embraced arts for social justice? And do you have models for government actors stepping up to create the vision? Oh, you see Margaret. Yes.
I have one model. We were attentive to this because we recognize this is, obviously government is critical, because government is the one that actually incarcerates and detains youth and in government and adults. Los Angeles County Department of Cultural Affairs is doing some really interesting work. They are working across agencies in LA County, across probation and just across agencies there to invest more, from a restorative justice frame in youth. And obviously California is a state where decarceration has been happening, driven by budget. And a shout out to Kristen Sakota, who is helping lead that. I have to say, I came from government. I worked at the Department of Cultural Affairs in New York City. And 12 years ago, there was never any collaboration across cultural affairs and probation and corrections and other agencies. But that we're starting to see that. And California leads in a lot of these things. And LA County is a great example of that. If there are others, I'm sorry I'm missing it. I see Greg Johnson in the mix. Hello, Greg. There are others I'm missing it, but please check out the work that's happening in the Department of Cultural Affairs in LA.
If I could just jump in really quickly, that's a great example, and that could actually be a terrific webinar in the future. Christian and her journey, there'd be so much to say. One other really quick, great example, as we know, district attorneys have enormous amount of power in terms of what happens to people. And one of the things that we have recently been a part of was supporting an artist to be embedded in Larry Krasner's, the district attorney in Philadelphia. And this particular artist, formerly incarcerated 27 years inside James Yahya Hogue. And he has been kind of transforming that institution just by his presence and painting portraits, kind of shining a spotlight back so that everybody from the district attorney to crime survivors and social workers are seeing anew their role kind of through his eyes and his portraiture. And so actually the DA's offices are so excited by how much energy and insight that his work has brought to their office, that there's been demand from other DAs who are interested in also embedding an artist. So that's just one example of public-private partnerships, if you will.
That's great. Thanks, Helena. Did anyone else want to add any final words before we wrap up? I know we're 2 minutes over, everyone. We will send a recording out, but if anyone has one more final word before we close it for the day.
I do real quick on the term of victims and survivors, depending on the preference of term. You know, I think part of the work that we're also up against, as mentioned, is not just the partnerships, but part of the reason why we still have youth prisons and prisons in general is this overall belief in punishment, you know, and punishment being, you know, incarcerating someone and incarcerating someone being something that actually is solving a problem. And I think the beauty of Sean's work and Mark's work as well is that what we're trying to really do is allow people to see the difference in a world where prisons don't exist and how we are achieving a different vision for how we support people and also hold people accountable from a loving, accountable place versus from a very punitive, accountable place, and seeing and showing to people how harmful we've been up until now and how helpful we could be in the near future if we really followed this vision. So just really want to uplift that is part of this work. And for any organizations doing work with survivors or you know, victims of crime and in general, it's really important for us to keep building that collaboration and that conversation because yeah, sometimes the biggest advocates who are pushing for punishment are people who have survived and or experienced harm. And as someone who has caused harm and actively also experienced harm myself from a young age, that dynamic is what we're trying to really diffuse and really bring a bigger understanding to. So I just want to uplift that as we wrap up, that this is the ongoing uphill loving battle that we're all in, but that I hope we can do more around that and really deconstructing that really toxic sort of narrative around punishment and where we don't want to be anymore.
Oh, thank you, Hernan. I don't want to add anything to that. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sherilyn. Thank you, attendees. We are going to send out some invitations, and Sherilyn will send you some love from us, shall we say?
Absolutely. And in addition to all of the love, I will also be sending, which is also very loving, a recording of this presentation and the slide deck. There are a lot of slides that we did not get to share for today, but you will have access to them. An extra special thank you to all of our presenters. I'm in arts mindset right now. All of our presenters, and extra special thank you to everyone who's worked hard to put this together. Please do take our survey and follow up to this so we know how you felt about the presentation. And there are some questions that we didn't get to, so we have the contact of the presenters there so you can reach out to them. And finally, we hope that you will keep this conversation going, especially with the focal point of youth and justice. especially in the space of philanthropy, as we reimagine the future in the present together. If you have further questions, you can feel free to reach out to me, Sherilyn Seeley, and we thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you, Sherilyn.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you all.
take care.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sean. I can't see everyone, but thank you, Risa. Thank you, Helena. Thank you, Hernan. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Eddie and Sherilyn.